All right, welcome everybody. In the new year, we are resuming our reading schedule of Goethe's Faust, part 2. And today we're going to discuss Act 3 and also just do a quick review and just look back at where we've been. And hopefully this will give us some good context for what's happening in this particular act. So what I did is I made some notes, just trying to cover kind of the high points of Faust, where we've been in Act 1. And let me just go over that, because I think that, you know, all of these acts in part 2, they're very involved. They're very full of material and full of changing scenery. And so it's easy to lose the overall thread, right? Like, but how did we get here and why are we here? What's the project and what's the overall direction? So in part 1, if you remember, we started with this discussion between God and the devil, and the bet that the devil, Mephisto, wanted to make with God about Faust. And the subject of the bet was, is there something the devil can offer Faust that will prevent him, or rather make him stop striving to be better on his path, on his search? And God said, no, you will not be able to do this. Devil said, sure, I'm taking you up on it. Let's do it. So that's the kind of the overall scheme of things. And then of course, Faust, when we find him, is terribly dissatisfied with various things that he's tried in his life. He's coming out of the academia, if you will, being a professor. He's tried the law, he's tried theology, he's tried alchemy. When we find him, he's trying to get into magic and conjuring up spirits. And so he's terribly dissatisfied. And so the devil basically takes advantage of that. And when they meet with, and when he first meets Mephisto, the conversation gets to, is there anything that the devil can find that will satisfy Faust? And Faust says, no, if I at any given moment say, stop moment, you're the most fair, then, you win and I lose, and you can have my soul, you can have whatever you want. So that's the same bet essentially that God made with the devil, and is being rephrased with Faust, but it's the same, pretty much the same exact terms. And so the project that Mephisto is on is trying to find and show Faust all the various facets of life that could possibly satisfy him, could possibly bring him to admit that there's something in this life that's so overwhelmingly valuable and transcendent that for that one moment he can trade everything else. And so what have we tried? Well, if you remember, we started with just the kind of the basic, I would say the lowest denominator, which is just pleasures, right? Pleasures of life. We went to the cellar at Auerbach and just had some good old drinking with some peasants, and then we went partying. We took it up a notch and went to the witch's kitchen and started partying with that crowd. And that, of course, culminated in the Walpurgis night, where we met with all kinds of devilish characters. But none of that really had a lasting effect on Faust. It is interesting, especially in connection with today's reading, to note that if you remember, in the witch's kitchen, Faust sees the image of Helen in a mirror. And initially, he then thinks that Gretchen is the expression of that image, but ultimately Gretchen, who is the next project in Mephisto's plan, really fails to capture Faust, right? There's a seduction, there is a tragedy of everything that happens with Gretchen, but ultimately Faust is not willing to leave everything for her. and he leaves her instead to die in a prison cell. But Gretchen herself is saved from what we read. She is, but of course, she is while she's saved, the damage is done, and so Faust is also now terribly guilty, feels terribly guilty of how he treated her and her mom and her brother. I mean, there's just like it's a chain of destruction really that follows all of this. And in part two, we have a kind of a reset moment, right? We hit the reset button, and Mephisto has to somehow help Faust recover from this initial failure and get back on track of trying different things, of striving, as he puts, Faust is striving for the fairest stars from heaven and deepest lusts from earth. That's the kind of the plot line, right? That's the description of the Faustian man, the man who has high ambitions and does not want to be limited, tied to anything. And that's the setup, right? So then in part two, we switch gears completely, and we go into a completely different mode with the emperor, right? We go to court of the emperor, and now we are not just looking for temporary pleasures of life, but the ambition is much grander, right? It's all about ruling and ruling the economy. And we have this wonderful plan of saving the economy by printing money, right? And issuing bonds against the hidden treasures in the ground. That's Mephisto's brilliant plan. And then we have this carnival that almost is like the microcosm of human experience, right? You have all the different tradesmen and different professions and different parts of society represented there, and also the different passions that rule society. We have greed and fear and hope. And so that's a very different kind of a setup, right? A different pace. But Faust is not really satisfied with any of that either. And he wants to, he asks Mephisto to find Helen. He is back. He saw Helen in that witch's kitchen, and that image is haunting him. And so first that passion is reignited when the emperor wants to see a play by that has Helen and Paris involved. And when Faust observes them, he tries to clutch Helen, not realizing that it's just an image, just I guess an apparition of her. And again, it's like touching a live wire. She disappears, and then he goes unconscious. And then the next in Act 2, again, we're switching gears. I mean, this play is so dynamic, right? That's the other thing, is you have to keep with it, right? We're jumping around. First we're the emperor's court. Now we're back in Faust's old study, right? And what's happening there? Well, we have Dr. Wagner, who took over from Faust, and he is now creating this artificial human being, homunculus, right? The man in the retort, little man in the retort. And the idea of homunculus is that he is this abstraction that represents maybe the highest level of rationality, the highest level of human intelligence, but he doesn't have an actual existence in the flesh. He doesn't have a material existence, which he longs to have. He realizes it's not enough just to have good ideas, which is where we started with Faust. Faust doesn't want to just know things. If you remember, when he is translating New Testament, he says, in the beginning was the word. No, in the beginning was the deed. The word is not enough. He doesn't want to just have knowledge. He wants to have experience. So we're back on track with that. And homunculus says, you guys need to revisit the classical Greece, the classical civilization, to really answer Faust's longings. And so with that in mind, we go to the classical Greece, which again raised all kinds of interesting questions about how are we traveling? Like, are we traveling in space only? Are we traveling in space and time? This question is again relevant, especially in Act 3, where we go to Helen and we actually observe her at a moment in time. She is returning from with her husband Menelaus supposedly from Troy, after Troy has been sacked. And the question I think I was pondering is Goethe actually the first person to invent time travel? We typically associate Herbert Wells with the time machine, right, with time travel. But maybe Goethe is the first one, because we're past just moving in space. We're now moving in time too, and we go back to ancient classical Greece, not just frozen in its sort of essence, but to a specific moment in time. So that's kind of my review of where we've been and the project that we've been on. And with that, I want to stop, and I guess if you've read part 3, or rather act 3 of part 2, I want to stop and maybe give any of you a chance to maybe discuss anything that you thought was salient, maybe main themes, and then I'll jump in and maybe just do my own characterization of that. But I want to give you a chance to talk to. So does anybody want to do a quick summary for us and just high points of Act 3? If not, I can do that, but I want to make sure that I'm not monopolizing the time too much here. Dimitri, do you want to maybe do a quick summation for us? Or no? Okay, fine. You're muted, so I can't hear you.
I can bring some points the salient points, but I wouldn't want to summarize the whole.
Okay, no problem. No,
I read
no
it months ago.
Okay, no worries. I can do that too. Or Allison, I don't know if you wanted to do that. No. Okay. All right. No worries. Just want to make sure again, like I don't want to monopolize the time too much.
I was just so confused. I was like, I feel like he's like a pinball machine. You know, it's like now he's with Gretchen. Now, you know, we're over in Greece, and now here come all the gods and the nymphs and the wood nymph and the tree nymph, and then all of a sudden here's Helen, and I'm sort of like, why? Like, you know, so I don't know that I'm the best at summarizing it right now.
Okay. Madeline, you have your hand raised. Go ahead if you want to jump in here.
Well, it seemed to me that one of the big themes in this was the passage of time.
Mm-hmm.
Am I the same person I was when I was young and walked up these steps as I am when I'm walking up them now? There are also ones where she is her, and there's a sort of dual self of Helen. Ones where she is herself inside, but also someone else, you know, her old self. And is herself divisible? Forcas says beauty's not divisible. Who's possessed her for his own is not about to share her out. But again, that's almost a question of time as well as space. There were some more things like that where there's sort of duality of Helen. One of you always contradicting the other and being contradicted right back. We have the memory palace, of course. And then there was in the courtyard of the castle part, around line 95-90 in my book, Helen has multiplied. She says, both gods and heroes, demigods, and even evil spirits have dragged me all about, I don't know where. When I was simply one, the turmoil that I caused, more turmoil still when there were two of me. Now I am three, am four, trouble after trouble, endlessly. So Helen keeps having this multiplicity of selves throughout, whether it's questioning if she's the same self walking up the stairs, or whether beauty, her beauty, she's the personification of beauty, if that's divisible. So I think a lot of it is about multiplication of self, but also through time. And I think that Goethe here has some deep ancient Greek mysticism in mind, as far as this goes.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to maybe let me do a quick summary first, and then we can dive into the details. Because I think it will be easier so that everyone is on the same page. So I do think that this is a rather difficult section of the book to interpret, and there's multiple interpretations from what I've seen of what's happening. But the most basic one is that, you know, Faust is still searching for Helen, as he has been, again, all the way from part one, and he also is searching for perhaps more than just erotic pleasure, as it was with Gretchen. He doesn't want to. It's not just about seduction. Maybe it's more about something else, and it is maybe that more philosophical quest for beauty that we all strive for. But in any case, whether that's true or not, he has been searching for Helen, and now in Act 3 we have the fulfillment of his wish, and the way that happens is through Mephisto. Mephisto wears the garb of one of the four kids, which are the daughters of Phorcys. These are, if you remember, are the same as the Graia. They're kind of like these witches that share one tooth, one eye, and one ear or something like that. And actually Mephisto lends them, in the previous act, he lends them one of his teeth in return for their cloak, so he can impersonate them. So now he's impersonating this ugly witch, essentially, and he goes back in time, and so to meet Helen at this point where she is returning home from Troy. This episode is loosely based on two plays of Euripides. One is Orestes, and the other one is Trojan Women. In both of these, we have a description from different standpoints of this time when Helen and Menelaus were coming back from Troy. It is interesting that in Orestes, there is a description of Helen disappearing in the midst of Orestes trying to kill her. There, the plot is you have Orestes who is trying to plot against Menelaus, and he, as part of the plot, they want to capture Hermione, the daughter of Helen, and then also kill Helen. And as they're trying to kill her, as they really are ready to plunge the sword into Helen, she disappears. And the way it's described, I found the actual passage. It says, let's see. So then Orestes turned again to the daughter of Zeus, that's Helen, to slay her, but she had vanished from the room, passing right through the house, O Zeus, and earth and light and night, whether by magic spells or wizard's arts or heavenly theft. What happened afterwards, I do not know. So this is the passage in Orestes, in Euripides' Orestes. So Goethe takes this passage, which is not very clear at all what's happening there, and he makes a whole addition or extension to that. He uses that to say what actually happened was Mephisto he appears to Helen and says, Menelaus is going to kill you. I have a way out. Are you ready to follow me? And well, it's not really a choice, right? It's either death or follow this ugly witch. But he says, I have this castle you can go to. The castle is manned by these beautiful ardent soldiers, and their head is this prince who is also good looking. So, I mean, it seems like a perfect setup, right? So Helen, as much as she is unsure about trusting this ugly witch, she says, fine, And so as soon as she gives her consent, which is kind of critical in these devilish magical things, you have to give your consent, right, to the evil forces so they can then do something for you. As soon as she gives her consent, then she is transported into this castle. So rather than Mephisto, Goethe uses this passage from Euripides to make a whole big thing out of it. And that's the setup. As soon as she is transported, then she, of course, meets Faust, who is the beautiful prince, who sweeps her off her feet, and he himself is swept off his feet. So they have a immediate romance blossoming. And not only that, we're transported in time magically, and now they have a child, a Europhone. And Europhone is the what was the word? I guess kind of like a prankster, kind of like the pranksters we just had in our calls here. But he is unrestrained, and he is he's supposed to, I guess, represent in some ways the striving of Faust and the beauty of Helen. And that's the symbolism here, is that what does he represent? Does he represent creativity? Does he represent poetry in general? Does he represent, even some people suggest that he represents George Byron, and as the epitome of like this romantic poet that goes out and perishes, because of course, Europhone does perish at the end. And when he does, then Helen herself disappears. And as much as we might have thought that she was a real flesh and blood material person, she is not. She is actually, again, a spirit that is just conjured up and leaves at a moment's notice. And of course, we're left with Faust again, failing to achieve this lasting satisfaction. So that's the setup. That's kind of the high points of what's happening. I do want to then now turn this back to you to see if there are any thoughts on what you guys think in terms of interpreting this, and what, if anything, that I've just mentioned had any echo or sort of response from you. So anybody want to add their thoughts on any of this? Go ahead, Doug. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, if you could, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I haven't been able to keep up on the reading for a range of personal reasons, but I have done some research in terms of why part 2 puzzles me so much. And in some of Goethe's statements, he really is trying to reintegrate, which started in the Renaissance, the reintegration of Greek and Roman classical literature into the Renaissance and into Christian thought, and which had sort of purged a lot of the libraries, burned a lot of the libraries, and so a lot of the classical literature reemerged from the Eastern libraries, and from Ireland, I think, preserved a lot of it as well. But so these ancient literatures kind of reemerged into Europe. And he's also trying to reconcile the Romantic movement, which is trying to take into account the chaotic forces of nature and the Enlightenment. And so that idea of the brain and the body and the conflicts there. So, and I think he uses kind of, I've mentioned this before, the court mask forms, where it's almost like he just has these scenes from literature or history. Like we saw some of that in The Possessed, in Dostoevsky's Possessed, where you do this pageant of Russian literature with all these figures. So there's a lot of symbolic theater, which we don't do that as much because we're kind of captured by naturalism and realistic theater. But there are a lot of traditions in theater where you kind of do a skit integrating a lot of symbolic characters and classical characters that are symbolic of deeper meanings. And so Goethe also has theatrically a lot of spectacle to please the public, and then there are other meanings that are hidden in it for the initiated, like in the Magic Flute. He actually compares it to, I think, to the Magic Flute, and saying there's the spectacle and the fun and the comedy of the piece, but then underneath that there are these meanings that the initiated or those who have read more broadly or experienced more broadly will experience. So I think that's one reason why it's so baffling. He's working on multiple layers. And they say even a lot of the traveling troops were somehow possibly even Sufi oriented, like you bang a drum, you make noise, you have trumpets, you draw a crowd, and then hidden in the fairy tales are other meanings. You know, the fairy tale is very entertaining on the surface, but hidden within the fairy tale are other meanings, metaphysical, physical, you know, all kinds of meanings on different levels. And Goethe seems to be very much in that tradition. So
Thank you.
that's
That was
all.
interesting. Thank you. Madeline, go ahead. Sorry, Dimitri and then Madeline. If you guys could type in exclamation mark in the chat, that will help me. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to first of all, Helena. What does she represent, Helena? In my opinion, she represents both the ideal of femininity and that beautiful moment, which was from part one. So she, in my opinion, so and the what does Euphorion represent? He seems to he represents that Hegelian that we discussed last time, that Hegelian synthesis of Faust, and who represents the modern age, and Helena, who represents the classical age. And what we get is a romantic Byron. People associate Euphorion with Byron. So we get, so the synthesis of classical and modern is romantic, which is just starting in Europe. So it's Byron, you know, and that was what that's what it seems to me. What's interesting is that Helena, who represents that beautiful moment, she gives rise to another beautiful moment, Euphorion. And first Euphorion dies, so the beautiful moment represented by Euphorion dies, and then as soon as he dies, Helena dies, or her spirit, or whatever you refer to originally. So the death of one beautiful moment is followed by the death of another beautiful moment. But that's not it. That's not all. It seems to me that as soon as Faust starts to enjoy the beautiful moment with Helena, right? You see Phorcys, who is really Mephistopheles, he intrudes, and and as he intrudes, he breaks the pact implicitly, because the pact was, let me start enjoying that moment. But the devil does not allow Faust to start enjoying the moment. He intrudes as well. Menelaus is invading. You know, he makes a sudden entrance. He makes sudden intrusion. In this way, kind of implicitly breaking the pact. Do you see what I'm saying? He doesn't allow Faust to start enjoying the beautiful moment. He breaks the pact himself. That's my interpretation.
Okay. How do you interpret the death of Euphorion as the? Is he saying that the romantic synthesis is doomed from the start?
Well, you know, you have to remember the quote from Goethe. He says that, for me, the classic represents what is healthy, and romantic represents what is sick. This is his quote. So,
I mean, I thought he himself would view himself as a romantic.
Well, he was. I don't think he viewed himself really as a romantic, but I don't know. But that's his quote. So he says romantic is something that's sick. That is his direct quote. You know.
Well, that would explain it. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Dimitri. Madeline, go ahead.
Thanks, Phil. I'm looking at the figure of the little boy. So he is in Jungian terms, he would be the result of the union of the man with his anima figure. So he's in a sense, he's the divine child, but he's not the fully integrated self, obviously. So in other words, Faust's journey is not over just because he and Helen have produced this divine child. First, the child is like Hermes, who is Maya's son. He basically flies without wings by kind of bouncing around, so he's got some sort of anti-gravity thing going. And he steals everything, like Hermes.
Right.
He's stolen the trident from the sea god, the sword from Ares, the bow and arrows from Phoebus, the fire tongues from Hephaestus, and didn't quite make off with Zeus's dread thunderbolt. He beat up Eros, and he stole the Cyprian's girdle. Not sure who she was, but I'm sure it was a grave offense. And his music is better than the music of the old gods. As far as I recall from mythology, that sort of praise for a mortal usually results in some horrendous punishment for them. Interestingly enough, so here he is now as, I'm going to call him Euphoria, just because I think that that's really what Goethe is referring to here, is a sensation of euphoria. He says, "No, I won't stay here, an earthbound creature. Let go of me. My hands, curls, clothing, they're mine, I say." So just before that, Faust is saying, by your fall, you'll pull all of us down. So Euphoria is saying, I am myself, don't touch me, don't fence me in. And his father is saying, his symbolic father is saying, don't do that. You're going too high. So then we have a whirling dance, which is, between Euphoria and the chorus, which is definitely a theme that we've seen over and over in Faust, especially in part 1. His goal basically is to enthrall the adults. The chorus sings, then you have gained your goal, enchanting child, all of us heart and soul by you enthralled. And that's what euphoria does to us. It enchants us and enthralls us. Then euphoria becomes the huntsman, and the adults are the prey. But now we have the fickle nature of euphoria. Off through the woods pell-mell, over hill, over dale. I find it tedious and all too effortless, quick victory. So in other words, here is euphoria running around being fickle, which we know euphoria is. Then he seizes a young girl and she turns to flames in order to escape him. So basically, even self-immolation is better than being with this dude. Then he starts saying, I must keep climbing higher and higher. And Helen Faust in the chorus is saying, daring as a mountain goat. If you fall, oh, dreadful thought. But he's just got to keep going up and up. So now he sees he's in the middle of an island. And the chorus is also now an adult, although before the chorus had actually spoken in the first person voice of Helen. So this is a very flexible chorus. The chorus urges the boy to stay here in a peaceful place, just sit and enjoy the fruit with us. But now euphoria wants war. And I think that here we see euphoria turn into sort of a divine madness or frenzy. He wants war, he wants victory, he wants to climb higher and higher. See how high he's climbed. No longer does he seem, though far up, small. Cased in armor, keen to conquer, glittering in bronze and steel. So he basically is climbing higher, but getting bigger. He's turning into a man with a lot of armor as he grows. But ultimately, he says, now I'm a grown man, I'm a soldier, my duty is death. And he says, don't forbid what I wish most. And then he throws himself to the ground. And says his head illumined leaves a trail of light behind. And then interestingly, the chorus immediately after that calls him Icarus, Icarus, Icarus. Oh, but how sad it is. So I think that that pretty much sums up euphoria in terms of what euphoria is like for people to experience. It's beautiful, it's godlike, it has all the gifts, it's fickle, it goes into a frenzy, it won't hold still. It's a very tricky but universally adored and beautiful thing.
How does it, Madeline, how do you think it fits in with kind of the overall scheme of things? Like where kind of conceptually, philosophically, since Euphorian represents, like we said already, or we think it represents the union of the classical and the Western European up to this point, how do you sort of interpret what you just said and described very well of euphoria with kind of with that aspect of it? Like, how does that represent the union of the classical and I guess the medieval or the Western European up to this point? Or what are your thoughts? I mean, I started to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious. What are your thoughts?
I'm not so sure it does. I think euphoria represents the union of whatever Faust and Helen are. He represents the combination, and he is very much, he's kind of a hermaphroditic androgynous figure.
Mm-hmm. Like homunculus, you're saying.
Euphoria is, yeah. I guess the yeah, he's got the beauty, he's got the brains, he's got the I want to go higher-ness of Faust.
Mm-hmm.
And he also has that kind of sort of doomed quality of Helen in a way. But I still would say he represents mostly the conjunctio of Faust as a man and Helen as his anima figure.
Interesting.
And
Very
so Faust is not nearly a complete self yet.
Very interesting. Thank you, Madeline. Allison, go ahead.
Like at first I was really trying to figure out why does Faust have him go, and why is Helen the person that he needs to go be with? But then I thought, well, when you really think about Greek history, Greek literature, whatever, that she's the one who started this gigantic war because they're all fighting for her and have her go back. So it kind of makes sense that first he's with this sort of peasant girl, and then it's like, oh, that's not really enough. He's going to go after the most wanted woman in the entire history. So that makes sense. But then what I think is funny is this idea of, because in a way that makes sense, because he's never really about love. He's about status. He's about experiencing things and status, and she's the ultimate arm candy, I mean, I don't think he's capable of love, really. I don't think he has any clue about what it really is. But what I think is funny is, as I was reading about the descriptions of Euphorian and the things he was doing, and there's this like old song, The Cat's in the Cradle, and it came back to me, and I was like, it's The Cat's in the Cradle. Like, and there's a line in that song, there's like the father misbehaves and does all these things, and then his son grows up to be exactly like him, and he's like, he grew up just like me, and he's like shocked by that. And I think, well, that's essentially it. That Faust, you want to think, oh, he's older and he's grown up and he's wiser and he's more mature, but his son is exactly like him. I mean, he really is, making the same mistakes over and over again. And maybe the reason he's making mistakes is that the father never really did mature and grow. I don't believe for a minute that Faust ever really changed. I think he's pretty much the same exact guy that he was back at the beginning. He's just in a different realm, I mean, it's kind of like when somebody is like, I don't know, awful to their girlfriend when they're 20 years old, and then they get really rich and famous, and they're I don't know, have some millions and billions of dollars. Do they become a better person? Probably not. You know, they're the same person. I always feel like we're exactly who we were when we were 7 years old. Like there's this great series of movies called 7 Up, where they follow these kids every 7 years and saw that whoever they were at 7 was pretty much who they were throughout their whole lives. And the same is true of Faust. Like he's just not somebody who's a really decent, kind person. He's a very selfish person. Every decision he ever makes is about himself. And so, of course, he's going to produce a child like that. It's not a surprise, really. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And then the one thing, this is like a random thing, but there was one quote in here, if I can find it, I underlined it. I just, sometimes he says things that are just, where would it go? I put it in here. Helen said, is a censorious nature so ingrained in you that your mouth opens only to upbraid and scold? I just thought that was a great line, because I think, she wasn't talking to Faust, but, there's always people like that every word out of their mouth is an insult. They're scolding you. They're like, you're doing this wrong and that, and they'll find a nice little way of saying it. But that's just their personality. And I don't know, I circled this and I just thought it was funny, because I thought, sometimes these great pieces of literature, they describe a certain personality so perfectly. And, in just one little sentence, I don't know, it's just funny to me.
Yeah, well, she's talking to Mephisto, who is disguised as that.
Yeah.
And of course, that's a perfect description of him. The devil,
Right.
of course, is in the Bible is called the accuser. So that makes a lot of sense in that
Right.
context.
Yeah.
Thank you, Allison. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of just walking in the middle of this, but I mean, I don't disagree with Allison. I do, in the sense that I do wonder, is Faust capable of love yet? And that's kind of where it's almost a journey, I feel like, that he's on. That he's professing his love for for Helen, and they're professing their love towards each other, but there's something that's not real about that. But I felt like there was something at least a little bit more real. And I remember, Phil, you said to me, I said, here's a woman, Gretchen, that he really cared about. And obviously he didn't do a lot of things. He would, left her and essentially it was the result of her death. But I do, think that if there was a chance for him to be able to love, it was somebody like Gretchen. And that's kind of, I think it's headed into that direction. It's kind of showing that this other extreme is this Helen is this false sense of, I don't know, of a relationship of some sort, and then they have this child and I don't disagree with Allison. I think that Euphoria is just like him in a sense, that's constantly just doing whatever he wants, and ultimately ends up essentially killing himself, not unlike Faust would have done in the beginning, in a different way. So I don't know, I saw some of the similarities that Allison just talked about, where you could see a lot Euphoria and Faust and one another. But I'm also still wondering about Faust and love in general, if he's on a journey to find out what that actually is. And I don't know. I mean, I'm still waiting for the end on that.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Joe. And those are all really interesting questions that I think we should get into a little bit. Here is a thought I had, and this is, I guess, since we're talking about Gretchen and Helen, let's think about these two characters. How can we describe them? If we put them side by side, Gretchen versus Helen, they're both symbolic of the feminine, of the beautiful, and yet there are a lot of differences. In fact, there's some opposite type of differences, right? Helen is the ultimate seductress, if you will, but Gretchen is the opposite. She's the one being seduced. She's the innocent one, right? She is. How does she attract, or why does she attract Faust? It's almost like this devilish attraction where you see something that's completely innocent, completely experienced, and you want that because it's, you know, pure white, right? Whereas Helen is kind of the opposite, right? When we start with Act 3, Helen is describing all the different lovers that she's had, and it's very interesting how she describes it. It sounds, and again, maybe you'll disagree with me, and I'm very curious about that, but it almost sounds like she's very passive in all of this. She is born a certain way. Gods have given her beauty. That's her curse and her gift. And everything else that happens to her is the result of that. She herself doesn't really do any choosing or anything of agency after that. She's just kind of, you know, she's like a ball, right, that's set in motion, and she has a certain inertia, and everything else is, you know, is destruction in the wake of that inertia. That's kind of my take of how Goethe presents her. That's not necessarily how she is presented in Euripides or in other places, in the Odyssey, etc. But the way she's presented by Goethe is, she is this beautiful woman who has this thing, and everything else is the result of that. I do want to read a quick description of her by Hecuba from Euripides' Trojan Women, that I think Goethe really, again, he takes these two plays and he makes them the basis of Act 3, essentially. So the way Hecuba describes Helen is this. She's talking to Menelaus. She's telling him, she wants Menelaus to kill Helen, right? Hecuba does, because in some ways that would be her revenge for Helen and all the pain that she has caused to Troy, including the death of Hecuba's children. And so she says, I commend you, Menelaus, for your intention to kill your wife, but flee the sight of her, lest she captivate you with longing. She captivates the eyes of men. She destroys cities. She sets homes aflame. Such are her witcheries. So she is the destroyer of cities with her beauty. That's Helen in Hecuba's description in Euripides. And Goethe takes that, and again, he runs with that. And everything about Helen in the beginning is this sort of passive things that happen to her, including everything up to the moment when she meets Mephisto. And that is the turning point. This is the first time when she has a choice, it seems, in the matter, and she decides to follow. And then again, she has a choice when Euryphone dies. And even with Faust, obviously, well, with Faust, you can argue it's the same kind of inertia of her beauty. But when Euryphone dies, something happens, and she decides to go back. She does not want to proceed with this romance. She realizes there's something empty here, something that's not fulfilling to her paramour. So she's gone. So I'm curious what you guys think about that, her sort of the description of Helen and what kind of person she is, and how that plays into this idea of love and Faust being capable of love, etc. Dimitri, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to refer to the point that you raised before, that in one way, Helen and Gretchen are contrasts.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what you try to say. But in another way, they are very similar, because even the quote that Helena says that beauty and good fortune are but fleetly joined. So they're seldom joined, beauty and good fortune. Mm-hmm. So we have the same thing with Gretchen, right? So she was probably beautiful. She was beautiful, and she clearly didn't meet good fortune. So in this respect, they're very similar. Maybe in other respects, they're opposite figures, but in this respect, they're very similar. So
okay. Okay, thank you. Yep. Anyone else wants to comment on Helen? Am I depicting her in a too what's the word? Sexist way, I guess, when I say that she's too passive. Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the first time we see her, she's more innocent than Gretchen in that she's, I think, described as being 10 years old with all these old codgers drooling over her. And it's really quite creepy, that section of it. But but then she does, as Madeline points out in the chat, seem to change ages in the course of the play.
Right. When we see her in Act 3, she is not 10 years old. She is a
No,
girl. She is
but the
coming
first
back.
time,
Yeah, she's recollecting. She's recollecting her youth. And you're right, Doug. Absolutely, she's been pestered by men, since she was 10, which is creepy. Absolutely. And that's the game. I guess it's in some ways that's the thing that she cannot control, right? She doesn't have a choice about this. She is beautiful, and that's that. And it's never presented as if she has any choice about this, any kind of agency around her. And that changes once she starts interacting with Faust. So maybe, again, my kind of theory is maybe this union, this conjunctio, what she gains from it, right? Faust may gain something, but what she gains from it is this agency that she's never had before, that she is now not just a passive object in men's hands. She is the actress, right? Of her own fate. And what's interesting, I wonder too, if you recall, what's the setting that Mephisto and Faust bring her into? It's medieval castle. So he doesn't bring her into Enlightenment. He brings her into Middle Ages. He is the medieval lord of the castle. And what do we know about medieval times? Well, we have this courtly love ideal, right? We talked about this in Dante sessions. So it's very interesting that in that age, women were idolized. Women were completely put on a pedestal, but not in a way where not where they were trophies. They were the ladies, right? They were the ones that you pledged your allegiance to, and you would ask, "What do you want me to do, lady?" Right? What kind of exploits would you like me to go on, for your to honor you, etc. So they were given kind of this blank check, right? Of deciding, what their admirers should be working on or towards. And this is very interesting. Okay, we have a lot of people who want to join in or in the conversation. Madeline and then Allison.
Yeah, I think you really hit it, Bill. I think that here, Helen, she is someone with no agency. And I think furthermore, she's sort of like the homunculus. She doesn't really exist in some sense. And in fact, she vanishes at the end. I think that she is representative of beauty. And because they say it over and over, that's why I think it. And remember that part, I think it was in the Emperor sequence where the poet was basically this, he looked like he was lauding the emperor, but really poetry was the servant of power, of worldly power. And in some sense, that seems to be what's happening with beauty here, except beauty is elusive. It divides over time. Does it change or not? Can it be in more than one place at once? Can there be multiples of it? I know Doug has talked before very movingly about the disruptive power of beauty. And I think that's part of what's going on here. I know for Plato, there were three, truly wonderful ideals or forms. There were truth, beauty, and goodness. So I would say that Gretchen really did represent goodness. She was a genuinely good person. She was completely screwed over by Faust and by life in general.
Right.
But she was a good person nonetheless. and Faust was bored by her. Here is beauty. And so I'm wondering if perhaps in the final part of part 2, if we're going to see Faust unite with truth in some way. And if that perhaps will be the thing that does it for him.
Interesting prediction. Okay. Thank you, Madeline. Allison, go ahead.
I think what's kind of funny is it seems like Helen's life is the better one because, you know, there's all this wealth and power and all this stuff. And Gretchen had this poor little existence. But really, when you look at Gretchen's life, actually was better. Because, you know, I mean, this whole thing of Helen having these, you know, all these old men fighting over her when she's younger. I mean, I think the thing is that I think a lot of women can remember that, actually. A lot of women can remember being very, very, very young girls, having middle-aged men hit on them. It's like one of those things that women don't talk about, but I think we've all experienced it. We've all been there. But I think what she did was she realized that her looks were her power. So when you see her by this point, she's extremely manipulative. She's playing all these men off against each other. She's creating this whole war. Like she knows exactly what she's doing because has learned that that is the only way that she has any power. You know, and I think, you know, it's kind of interesting to think like if Helen had been in the little village and been a little peasant girl, would Faust have wanted to be with it? No, he would have like played with her and then tossed her away. Part of the attraction of Helen is that all these other men want her too. So he wants to win. And, you know, Gretchen was easy. Gretchen was just like, oh, so adoring. But I feel like, but the thing is like, Gretchen, you know, the love of Gretchen is what I would hope that men actually want in real life. Like, I hope that they reach a point where they realize that's the real deal. You know, that's the person who would actually be there with you forever and you ride or die. But I don't know. Some people get there, some people don't. I don't know. You know.
This reminds me, sorry, Allison, I have to jump in.
Yeah.
This reminds me of the, you know, the guys complaining about women always wanting the bad guy, the what's the word, the bad boys,
Exactly.
right?
That's
Always
exactly it,
going
yeah.
for the bad boys and then complaining how terrible it turns out.
It's so true, right? It's exactly the same thing. Like women will do this. They will go for the bad guy. And then but eventually they're like, I don't really want that. I want, you know, I want a man who's a Toyota, who's trustable and reliable.
Right. I don't want the guy with a Ferrari. I want the guy with a Toyota Camry.
Yeah.
Right?
And some men go through the same process, and some of them have 5 wives because they keep chasing Helen, and then they're bored of that Helen, and then the next Helen, and you know. So I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Madeline just posted in the chat that, but Gretchen is boring. Yeah, and that's the, you know, actually, you know, that's one of the themes. I think when we started talking about the Faustian man and the Faustian age as a phenomena. And Faust is the representative of the epitome of that. And what is, you know, Faustian kind of character? What is the Faustian man or Faustian age? It's the age of no limitation, right? It's the age of I want it all and I want it now. And a necessary prerequisite of that type of outlook is you cannot have morality, right? Because morality, what it does is it automatically limits you. It sets up these limits, and you can't have morality and be a Faustian at the same time. So ultimately, morality is screwed, and Gretchen is screwed with it because Gretchen is still part of that old world where morality and religion were paramount. And so to the degree that she catechizes Faust and wants to know, where do you stand on this dogma, or where do you stand on God, where do you stand on the church? Faust says, no, I can't be bothered by this. You know, God is everywhere. God is in my heart. You know, he is in the woods. Don't worry about it. You know, don't worry, be happy. And of course, on the heels of that, we have the death, the poisoning of her mother, the death of her brother. You know, all this mayhem, the social mayhem, and it's such a great parable of our times where none of us really like it when somebody tells us you can't do that. You can't see that. You can't, we don't like the word can't or shouldn't or ought not to. But at the same time, we also don't like the mayhem, the social implications of limitlessness and everybody just doing whatever they want. So I think Goethe is really brilliant. He explores these themes with Gretchen. Now, here is Helen. Helen, in some ways, is also a source of mayhem and destruction. And I like your, Alison, I like your real politique way of describing her, that she knows exactly what she's doing. She's using her tools of the trade to get what she wants. Here's a question I have about all this. How much of the, I look at part 2 as more abstract and more symbolical. I don't look at it, part 1 was much less symbolical, much less abstract. Everything that happened there, you can believe it as like it could happen to a real person in the real world. But part 2, we're in the magical kingdom, right? We're flying to Greece. We're doing, we're jumping around to emperor's courts where, it's not clear where actually this is happening at all. So with that in mind, do you think that what's happening between Faust and Helen, do you think it's more symbolical in nature, or do you still think of it as just a romance? That's my question to the entire group, not just Alison. What do you guys think? In other words, should you interpret this as another love conquest of Faust, or is there something deeper that Goethe is trying to?
I think Faust is so full of resonant symbols, he can hardly function at this point.
What do you mean by that?
He has very little action going on in this thing. It's all Helen's narrative, the chorus, speaking from different points of view, which is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering who is the chorus? Is the chorus like the committee in my head, basically, that's chiming in on various things from different perspectives? Or is the chorus, now I'm just going to ramble for a minute, is the chorus representative of Goethe himself? In other words, is the chorus representative of the author of the piece? And that the chorus takes different parts. It comments on things, it sets the scene, it relays exposition, and it also speaks from different perspectives. It takes the part of different characters and speaks as if it were them. So, okay, so there's my chorus as author theory for the evening.
Right, no, thank you for that. And I think, looking at Euripides, the chorus is kind of the voice of the author in a sense, right? That was its function in Euripides and other playwrights of that time. It was kind of this commentary, right, on what's happening in a sense. So maybe you're absolutely right. Maybe this is Goethe expressing himself here.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it. I don't know if anyone here has read John le Carré's book, The Little Drummer Girl. But it's a whole series of deceptions and people getting an actress to play the part of someone, and within that role she has to play another role, and she has different coaches and different experiences, and it's all bound up with terrorism, Israel, Palestine, and Germany. And at one point I realized that although le Carré had written an autobiography about his sort of external life, his upbringing, his conman father, all of that, that The Little Drummer Girl is really an autobiography of what it's like to be an author, to play all these different parts, to convince yourself of things, to have coaches in your head, to try on different roles. And I guess those thoughts were what got me onto these thoughts about the chorus.
Okay, thank you for that. Joe and then Dimitri.
I was actually thinking of your previous question of this idea of Faust and no limits. Is that all right to comment on? Or
yeah, sure.
So I mean, I agree with you, and I think that that's what's reflected in Euphoria as well. I think is that there's this idea that I thought about Faust. There is no limits. The idea he turns to black magic. And even Goethe throughout the entire book is talking about this, even with the creation of the Hermocules, if I'm saying that correctly.
The creation of what, sorry?
The what is it? The Hermocules? Is it the
Oh, homunculus, homunculus.
Hermoculus? I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Forgive me.
Yeah, the little man in the reed sword, yeah. Mhm.
Exactly. All of it is about pushing the limit. There are no limits. And that's what you kind of see throughout this entire play is that and what happens when there aren't any limits. And I think that that's what you're seeing and as well with Faust's son is just the extreme version of that. And so I mean, I think that that's kind of the point of the play, and to me that I've taken thus far. There's two things that I've really taken. I really never felt like Faust was ever risking anything. That was one. And that he's going to kill himself, so therefore why not sign the deal? But the other is that it's this idea that there are no rules. And the rules don't apply to them.
Well, there's one little caveat, and I think we talked about this with somebody in one of the previous sessions. We talked about who was that guy, the French scientist, religious. God, I'm going Pascal's wager.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we talked about Pascal's wager and how when you say he doesn't risk anything, well, he's risking his soul, if there is such a thing, right? He doesn't think it's anything, and therefore you're right. He treats it as he has no risk. And in fact, most of us who believe that there is no afterlife or anything, the attitude to life is we got to grab it all now because we are not risking anything. The only thing we're risking, we're going to die anyway. So why not?
But he was going to kill himself. I mean, so if you even go by theological standards, like
right. He was going to kill himself.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, that's where I'm thinking to myself, what's the real risk here that he's really posing? So that's like kind of my thought from the get-go. Anyway, that's all.
No, that's good. Interesting, Joe. Thank you.
So that leads to no limits. Let me just do whatever the hell I want because that's the
Yep. And that's the setup from the director's standpoint, right? Remember, director, he wants to have a play that will captivate everybody. And so to do that, you have to visit the heavens and the earth and hell, right? The whole thing. No limits. No, we don't want to just stay in heaven with the poet and his idealistic ideas, but we don't want to not go there either. We want to, because even the most debased person still wants to have morality, right? At the end of the day, some kind of morality. But we don't want to just stay there. We want to go to the tavern. We want to go to the earth. We want to go to Walpurgis Night and have a party with the devil, right? We want to go to all of it and experience all of life. That's Faust's design, and that's modern life, right? For us, that's kind of the which is why it resonates with us, because we identify with that easily. It's kind of the setup, right? We got to get everything the most from life that we can.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
so Dmitry, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to refer regarding the idea of no limits, right? I mean, in this case, kind of Faust represents some kind of neoclassicism, in the sense that in classical Greece, there are also no limits. Gods were moral. They had no morality. We see gods interacting without any limits, right? There is no concept of sin in ancient Greece. So it seems to me, and gods are clearly immoral. They indulge in every sin that you can imagine, and that represents neoclassicism,
right?
In the sense that our modern Faustian age is very close to classical Greece in terms of no limits, in terms of no morality. That's what I was trying to say.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I might agree with you there. I think we're definitely getting closer than we were. 100 years ago for sure. Yeah. Allison, go ahead.
I think this idea of no limits is really interesting when you think about it in terms of the women here. Because what's interesting is the way this is written. I mean, it's really written so that the men can look at Faust and they can say, well, sometimes I was like that, sometimes I wasn't. And, they can identify, probably every man can identify with them to some degree. But women, I think also, because, Gretchen and Helen in some ways are like the virgin and the whore, And the fact is, every woman has had times in their life when they were Gretchen and times in their life when they were Helen. But what is interesting is that you see the consequences with both of them. So like with Gretchen, she winds up dead. That's taken to that extreme. But with Helen, her manipulation of men creates a whole war. And, with mere mortals, you may not get that, but you may get men fighting over somebody, it still has disastrous consequences. Like you never want to, it's not a road you want to go down, But I feel like it's interesting how it's written in such a way that both genders can really find characters that they can identify with, and you can see how you've wrestled with this yourself, and there is something heady about it when you have that kind of power as a woman. Like they say sometimes that women's power they lose power as they age, as their looks fade or their looks change. And there is something to that, but what's also interesting though is when you think about women who have this power, who continue, but it's interesting because the women who really have power, that they continue to have power, it's changing where it's becoming more like a man. Like if you look at somebody like the different female politicians, their power is no longer about their looks. Their power is about their mind. So it's like women had to change in a way to be able to have that. But you still see it. You still see, I mean, I don't know, look at like Nancy Pelosi or, Hillary Clinton or whatever. They're still in this position where they are fighting to keep that power as long as they possibly can, which is kind of like Helen in a way. Always fighting to hold on to that power for as long as they can possibly have it. It's just interesting how it's, so relevant still today.
Yeah. I'm actually, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, and this is kind of a rabbit trail, but I thought it was maybe you'll get some amusement out of it. I was thinking of the Amazons in the classical tradition. The Amazons represent the active female archetype, right? The warrior goddesses, right? And of course, in the classical Greek tradition, what happens to the Amazons? Well, not a lot of good things in that tradition, right? They pretty much always get the sword in the end, whoever they happen to be. So obviously, in the Greek classical mind, the active woman who tries to, make her living by something other than sort of passive feminine beauty, that's an evolutionary dead end in their mind, it seems, according to their tradition. Maybe there's a different counterexample there, but Amazon is just such a big one, an obvious one, that it deserves mentioning. And then again, Helen sort of follows that, right? Follows that train of thought, that she is the destroyer of cities, but she is destroyed not because of a lot of stuff that she's doing. Although, Alison, you did say that she is probably a little more active in her plotting than we might be led to believe. But I don't know if Goethe actually believed that. Maybe Goethe was under her spell too a little bit, and maybe he thought that she was just this beautiful victim of everything else that happened to her. And of course, the way he describes when he describes her monologues, what does she say? Well, I was whisked away, by this beautiful Phrygian, by Paris. She doesn't say, I thought about it. I thought, this is not a bad deal, have some fun with Paris. Menelaus will come rescue me. Things will be good anyway, so why not, right? She makes it sound like she was just completely blindsided by this whole thing. And of course, with when she meets Faust, and the first thing we know is the watchman forfeits his duty because he is again overpowered by the sight of Helen. He's supposed to report any newcomers to the castle, and he doesn't do that because he can't tear himself away from looking at her. And she again just says, well, that's just the way I am. I mean, what can I do? I'm just, it's just my fate. I just the heavy cross I have to bear. And there's no plotting there. It's just something that is she's just like, okay, I'm just cursed with this thing. Anyway, that seems to me Goethe was under her spell a little bit too. So he doesn't give her a lot of credit there as far as plotting and realpolitik goes, except for maybe at the end, where she does make, it was a complete, it seems like a completely free choice decision to stop this romance and not go any further with it. And she is gone with Europhone. She follows her son. She follows him. And again, it's very interesting. What if you think of it symbolically, what does it all mean? What is Goethe trying to tell us about his ideas of euphoria and kind of the end of all that and beauty and how it all ends? Madeline, go ahead.
Well, now I am looking at how it all ends in terms of this act. So Icarus, Euphoria is dead. His mortal part has faded, but his aureole rises comet-like into the heavens, and his earthly accoutrements are left lying on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And Helen and Faust say, soon after gladness, grimly comes pain. And then Euphoria's voice from below says, so he's in the underworld now, in the world of death. He says, mother, in drear darkness, don't leave me alone. Then the chorus is speaking, and they say, who succeeds? A futile question. Fate is mute and gives no answer. Then Helen leaves. She asks to go to Persephone, and Persephone takes her. So she is off into the underworld with her son. And Persephone, of course, is going back and forth as the eternal rebirth of spring,
Mm-hmm.
and the return of winter.
She's a Helen herself, in a way, right? Persephone is.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's going, because then it goes on to say, where's that part about the fount? Okay. Who succeeds? A futile question. Fate is mute and gives no answer. On this desolate occasion, when all hear in silence suffer, sing, however, new songs. Don't droop your heads disconsolately. Earth is song, and from that fount, song pours out incessantly. And then the very last part is that staggeringly beautiful two-part chorus, where it's going back and forth along the lines, just endlessly pouring forth this just incredible, beautiful song that covers all the gods, the elements, the wonders of the earth, the happiness of people, the demigods, everything. And then right near the end, here comes another whirling dance with goat-footed satyrs, all that's moral, cleft hooves trampling, all the senses whirling, swirling, and what Doug had put in chat about Dionysus.
Mm-hmm.
Drunken creatures grope for bowls, heads and bellies filled to bursting. And though here and there some cry out, apprehensively it only makes the tumult louder, madder. For to lay up new wine, the old wineskins must be emptied fast. And that is the end of this act. And I think that Goethe here is commenting on the cycles of history. and also what happens when people are in the thrall of gods. In this case, looks like Bacchus, but really going through a sort of whole cycle of gods on the earth in that beautiful chorus. And then Phorcys, of course, stands up and says, now I am taking off my mask and veil, and she is Mephistopheles. So he was there all along. The cloven-footed one has been there right from the very beginning, right there welcoming Helen home, right there in everything. But at the same time is necessary to trample things down so that things can be born anew.
Thank you, Madeline. This is interesting, something to ponder here. So are you saying that in a way, everything that happens here is kind of the result of Mephisto scheming, or kind of the natural cycles of life? In other words, are we kind of pawns? Is everyone a pawn in this game, including Faust, including Helen? Or am I misreading your analysis?
I'm sorry, I was looking at chat and I missed what you said. I'm really sorry, Phil.
No problem. I'll repeat it. So based on what you said, are you saying that everything that happens here is kind of a ploy, a scheme of Mephisto, and also a combination of that and sort of there's the natural cycles of life, and in a way that means that we and Faust and Helen included are all kind of a pawns in this circle of life, or cycle of life, if you will. That is okay.
Yeah, and I think that Mephistopheles is part of that. In
Oh,
other words,
Faust is part of that as well.
yeah, he's not the prime driver. He's just
Okay.
one element in that big cycle that the chorus is singing about, which is basically they are the endless song that pours forth from the earth in all these different varieties.
Okay. Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, in following that up, I think Mephistopheles is definitely, when he's at the classical Walpurgis knot, he's kind of out of his depth. They're having too much fun, and his Nordic spirit rebels at it, and so he is a victim of his own time and place, and he's limited. So I think Goethe is sort of striving towards a global world perspective, in the sense, and I think this takes us back to some things we discovered in Frankenstein, that it's a tour book, a travel book, and each place has a genius or a genii, or what do they call that? The genii loci, the genius of the place. And so Goethe seems to go, okay, all these gods and their servants, they're parts of different kingdoms, and so there's it's a return of pantheistic spirits and divinities in the face of the monotheism of Christianity, and I mean it's almost like he's saying, none of us sort of know what's going on. It's like, you don't know what's going on, do you, Mr. Jones? I mean, there's something where everybody in this, even I don't know where God fits in this. At the end, we'll probably revisit that. But even he is sort of playing a gambling game, and
Absolutely.
and then
Yeah.
Mephistopheles, it's not gambling with Faust so much in Goethe's Faust. I think in Marlowe, it's a gamble. In Goethe's Faust, it's a business pact, and can they live up to it? So it's a shift from a gambling model, which you see in the Bhagavad Gita or in the Mahabharata, to a business model, a contract. And we're going to stick to the contract. And it's a different time and a different place, and the gods shift, from even Wagner in a way, and that whole mythic world he's creating is a reflection of business and bringing gold out of the ground and making money out of it.
Yeah, that was an interesting touch, right? With the ants digging for gold. which is straight out of, I think, Pliny or somebody else like that, when they describe India and they had all these ideas about these ants, the giant ants accumulating gold. And anyway, it was.
And early in part 2, they have those riffs on money and the emperor and money and what's money going to do. And money sort of conquers all, sort of the divine right of kings is sort of taken over by money,
No, absolutely. That's a huge part of today's society, right? Money is just, if you're unhappy, well, it's just because you're poor. If you become rich, then that will solve everything. So that absolutely is a huge part of life. And I think absolutely, Doug, I think Goethe is brilliant in bringing that in. He brings it in on a higher level, right? He brings it at the state level, saying, if we just spread this money, helicopter money, to borrow common phrase, on everybody, then everybody's going to be happy. And it seems like it's working. Everybody comes in and they're saying, oh, I'm going to go partying. We're going to, just have a grand old time. And then you have the carnival.
You print a lot of money, you can go to war too, you buy wars, absolutely. And you buy weaponry, and you just.
And we are going to see that too.
We worry more about the welfare mothers than the weaponry that is like.
Yeah. In some ways, in some way, what's happening here is somewhat akin to what Dante is doing, right? Dante's project was to unify, in some ways, the classical and the Christian tradition, right? Mm-hmm. Classical, Greco-Roman deities, and sort of like Thomas Aquinas philosophy, right? And he did that by saying all of these classical figures were archetypes, right? Zeus was the archetype of God. Hermes was an archetype of this particular virtue, and also possibly sin. And anyway, archetypes, right? Goethe, I think, does something different, where he is saying these are not archetypes, these are individual facets of life. And let's see what happens if we try to bring them all in into this one grand sort of tour de force, right? Which we're doing, right? We're going everywhere. We started in the contemporary Romantic period and in the Gothic laboratory. We went to classical Greece. We went to medieval times. And now we're trying to do the synthesis of medieval and classical. And again, it's curious to me that he chose medieval period and not his own period as the period that he wants to synthesize. Maybe he thinks that his own time is the result of that synthesis. Maybe Euphorian is his own age. And, which is why people identify Euphorian with George Byron, who was obviously a contemporary of Goethe's, and himself perished, just like Euphorian does, right? He perished in Greece, helping them fight for independence. So it's a very kind of interesting theory. So I'm curious if you guys have any further thoughts on any of that. Don't all speak at once.
Can you summarize the question one more time? I got a little bit.
Well, the question is, there are several questions that I think are interesting to think about. One is, why did Goethe choose medieval time as his point of synthesis with the classical tradition and not his own time, right? The time of Enlightenment, the time of emergence of Romantic poetry. There were lots of things going on, right? Nationalism, and there's just all kinds of stuff going on in Europe at this time. Let's not forget the French Revolution. And I mean, this is just a lot, right? But he doesn't want that as his synthesis in his historical alchemical retort. He doesn't want that. He goes back to medieval times as perhaps the purest representation of Western tradition, right? Western European tradition. And then he takes the classical. What's the best about the classical? Well, it's the beauty of Helen and everybody associated with her, the gods, the goddesses, the nymphs, Dionysus, right? All of that is kind of brought in with as part of that. The tragedies of Euripides, that's the high point of, high classical tradition. Why does he do that? That's number one. The second part is, if that's the case, then maybe his own time is represented as the result of this synthesis, right? The Euphorian, does it represent the euphoria of his own time? Perhaps everybody thinks of their time as being the most hectic. Maybe for Goethe, his own time was the hectic child, the Euphorian, who wanted to go higher and higher and higher without any limits, and eventually he perishes, and beautiful Helen disappears. Maybe in Goethe's mind, again, I'm just thinking out loud, maybe in his own mind, he thought of this point in European history was this precarious moment where they were going to lose their connection to the classical tradition and beauty in the search for more, whatever it was they were searching for, right? Rationalism. We have these utilitarian theories, right? Socialism is going to become a thing. And even before it becomes a thing, it's already kind of in the works philosophically. But then, so there's a lot of thinkers and a lot of change happening. So is Goethe identifying Euphorian, this child who perishes with his own time? So that's the second part. So that's the question, I guess, to the group. Madeline, go ahead.
That is a great question, Phil. Thank you. It really got me thinking. So my thinkings are that Goethe chose Helen, excuse me, and presented her in this way because it fit with his idea of what medieval times represented. And so Helen, in many ways, represented kingship, dynasty, the divine right of kings, who owns the right to beauty. I liked your comments, Phil, on sort of courtly love and the knightly tradition of chivalry and all that, which I think was fine if you were a beautiful lady, but the serving wenches would probably have an entirely different take on it. Their lives would have been more like that of the 10-year-old Helen, with lots of men leering at them and groping them. And I think that Goethe is quite aware of all this throughout. I don't think that he's using women as symbolic puppets any more than he's using men, or any less than he's using men. Let's put it that way. And I do think that he is working his way through history in this whole part too. And now we're up to medieval times. And we're seeing the roots of, we're actually seeing medieval times as quite pagan. I'm not seeing a pope. I'm not seeing people going to church. I'm not seeing any of that. I'm seeing a complete affiliation with paganism. And I think that, well, that would have still been when Aristotelianism was very big, because all they had access to really was Timaeus by Plato. And the rediscovery of Plato's works didn't come along until the Renaissance. So there might be some commentary on that hidden in here. I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm not subtle enough to see it. I think that, so yeah, I think that he chose these aspects of Helen in order to mesh her with the medieval, and also the medieval glorification of combat. They're scaling the walls. There were always ramparts and defenses, and you're going up and up. You're climbing ever higher. And the more armor you put on, the bigger a man you become. And, you know, from what we know of medieval times, it might be a bit different, but certainly the way he would have seen things, given what he was able to access and read about, it would have seemed very much like that. And I think that euphoria does kind of fill the bill for what for what one aspect of medieval life was like.
So you think euphoria represents that period, actually, the medieval period?
One aspect of it, at least, which would be the end of euphoria. You know, that I'm putting on armor, I'm getting bigger as I go away. War is everything, valor, victory, battle. But then he just jumps or falls. He's not even killed in battle.
Hmm. And what is that? What does that mean?
I do not know. Maybe it's
I'm
when
like probing you, like probing your theory.
I'm just speculating here. Maybe it's one facet of suicide, what Joe was talking about, because that maybe a sort of manic energy that can drive people to suicide by sweeping them away in a way that seems real at the time, even though it isn't.
What do you? Thank you, Madeline. What's the consensus of the? Doug, go ahead. I'm curious if you have any comments on that.
Well, I think some of this, the question you asked about why does he reach back, is that I think history does move in waves, and then it retreats, and then it moves in again. And so this sort of attempt to humanize Christianity, you know, I think it was George Bernard Shaw who said Rome was, Christianity was Romanized more than Rome was Christianized. And Dante's certainly picking up on that, saying, you know, does poverty have a lover? You know, and that it hasn't had a lover for 1100 years.
Right.
And then the Renaissance, I think, I sometimes like the way Bucky defined the brain and mind. The brain is a good computer tool. It divides, it analyzes, it sort of defines things, and it deals on that level of kind of the execution of certain things. But the mind is what synthesizes, as opposed to break down into separate definitions, that the mind synthesizes things. And I think various writers throughout history try to sort of synthesize the whole shebang. Then that becomes often an abusive overriding system, and somebody comes along to blow it up. And I think that's what Hegel's writing about in terms of a certain thesis, antithesis, synthesis, which leads to a thesis, an antithesis, a synthesis, and a constant sort of broiling thing. And I think Goethe is writing much at the same time, under similar forces that influenced Hegel, to try to make sense of these different perspectives. And it's a simplification, but Christianity seems to, at certain points in history, symbolize one move of righteous indignation and purity, and the pagans, you know, symbolize something more human and integrative about what appears to be rational and irrational forces. And even Freud is a culmination of that, trying to explain the irrational, you know, of why do we behave in certain ways, and disown that. Oh, that's not me. That's not me. You know, Jung also writes about that, how we bag the parts of ourselves we don't like, and then they explode out of the bag like Jekyll and Hyde, mess up things around us. And we go, I don't know what happened. That wasn't me. That wasn't me. You know, but that aspect of the chaos of the individual soul, and the chaos as that reflects in the world around us, I think is what all these writers are trying to figure out. And so he's reaching back. That's a really good question. I don't know that I can fully answer it, but that's an interesting question, that he is reaching back to some medieval ideal, which is considered the Dark Ages, when in fact the synthesis that went on in Spain in the golden age of Spain, where Jewish and Christian and Islamic mystics got along very well. And for 500 years, music, poetry, religion was all collaborating in Spain during the golden age. They didn't think they were
living in the Dark Ages.
Until it decided to purify itself.
That's right.
And Spain sort of shot itself in the head by destroying agriculture and its universities by throwing out the Arabs and the Jews. You know, they kind of decimated their culture by purifying themselves, which is sort of what we're on the verge of doing now. And often the ancient Greek Athens tradition was to include the stranger, if they wanted to become an Athenian citizen, to include the stranger in your culture. And some of the great writers came from other areas, not from Greece, from Macedonia and other places. So
Right, well, it reached its epitome with Alexander, of course. He was the great, created this one huge metropolis, right?
yeah, but even in Oedipus, Thebes is sort of fears the stranger, whereas Athens integrates the stranger.
Mm,
And Athens takes Oedipus under his wing after Thebes drives him out, because in fact Oedipus is a hero and not what we still think of him, of the sexual sin, which he's not really guilty of,
right.
from Sophocles' perspective. He actually reveals the truth at the cost of his whole kingdom, whereas Creon preserves his kingdom at the cost of all truth and religious observance. I mean, so it's a power versus truth sort of dichotomy. And Oedipus is still to this day considered a hero in Athens, and that his bones are buried there, and that gives them power, because he pursued the truth at the cost of his own power.
Interesting. Thank you,
Yeah.
Doug. Allison and then Madeline.
What I was thinking is that Faust reminds me of somebody who's bipolar and not on meds. I've known a couple people who were bipolar, and they would always tell me how they just did not want to take their meds because they enjoyed the highs so much. And both people said, well, yeah, sometimes I'm kind of suicidal when I'm in the lows, but the highs, there's like nothing like it. And and I just kept going, I don't think it's a good idea to be off of them. But I remember both of them, they said to me that you can't, somebody who's not like that can't even begin to imagine what that high is like that they feel. And I feel like Faust is kind of like that, where he just wants to experience everything at this really insanely intense level. And he's just not happy with something that's just like comfortable,
That's a great point, Allison. And again, don't forget in all of these things that, of course, it's not just about Faust the individual, right? Faust is the representation of our whole culture today.
Yeah.
And it's so spot on that what you just said, because let's look at, for instance, I mean, you can take anything, but I'll take technology because it's the most obvious thing.
Right.
Nobody has ever said in technology, let's just stop where we're at. We're good.
Mhm.
We don't need an 8-liter engine. Let's just use the 4-liter engine and just, we're all good. Anybody who says that, they're always looked upon as Luddite, right? As anti-progress, anti-this, anti-that.
Mhm.
And they always lose.
Yep.
They always lose. I mean, there's so many examples of that. I mean, people have always rebelled against technology because it takes away their jobs, it takes away their security, it takes away whatever they've been used to. Most of the people, not most, but people in sort of like, what was it? I guess it started in the Luddites were in the Industrial Revolution, right? And there were people that were threatened by these advances in the mill. What was that? Correct me if I'm wrong, what was it, the cotton gin, or what? There was some kind of invention that threatened the livelihood of people that did something manually versus it was now automated and it was like 10 times more efficient or something like that. And that's the way technology works, and that's the way Faustian attitude works, right? We can never have enough, right? Nobody has ever said we're going to just stay with what we have and that's it. Maybe it's part of the human spirit. I mean, maybe it's not just something new that happened to us 200 years ago. Maybe it's just part of the human spirit and why we are not living in caves anymore, right? That's the good part. But the bad part is everything that we see in the wake of it, destroying ourselves, kind of like Oedipus, going back to him, he wants to have the knowledge, everything. He wants to have all of it, right? He can't limit himself either. Oedipus is kind of Faust in that sense. And of course, he gets what he is he gets more than what he's bargaining for, much more than that. And Faust is definitely in that same bipolar, if you will, Allison, bipolar camp.
I think the key is that we need to think of something to invent that everybody will sort of need but definitely want, and that we can keep updating every 2 years, like an iPhone, but we need to invent a new one, then we'll all be rich.
Well, yeah, you just brought up the other one, right? The technology, which walks hand in hand with capitalist system, commerce, or whatever you want to call it, commercialization. Same exact concept, right? Can never have too much money, can never have too
Right.
much of anything. So expand forever.
Right. And yeah, and the genius of the iPhone is that, oh, it's not good enough. Now you need this one. Nope, now you need this one. Now you need this one. And anybody who invents something, we're like, here it is, we're done. They're never going to be rich. Not for long anyway. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. Madeline, go ahead.
Well, so many things to say on these threads here. I think Freud's take on the accumulation of wealth was that of a child playing with its own poop. In other words, the fascination of this stuff piling up and getting this gooey stuff on its fingers. And I made this. I see people are laughing, but Freud actually said this. He was an earthy guy when it came to this, and quite brilliant and rebellious for his time, which was the Victorian era. I think, Phil, in England, it goes back before the Luddites. I was thinking of the enclosures.
Yes.
The draining of the fens, which were big common areas. Many farmers had areas that they farmed in common, they grazed in common, they fished in common, they used the land in common. And there were community agreements that went back for centuries, if not millennia, about how to do this. Then private property was coming along much more. Then there were, different baronies taking things over. Then they wanted more arable land. And so the big technology that came along was this pump. I forget what it was called, but it has a specific name. And it was a type of pump that they used to drain the fens, which were these big marshes that covered big parts of England. When you see in the news things like, Somerset is completely flooded, or this other area in southern England is completely flooded, those were originally fens. And without the continuous draining, we take it for granted that they're solid land now, but they really weren't. I wanted to go back to what Allison was saying about manic episodes. There are two dangers. One is that someone in the grips of a manic episode is far more likely to be a victim. In other words, they're out there following their impulses. Their wonderful new friend, who they met on the street corner, who became their new best friend forever, has convinced them to max out their credit cards to buy, book cruise dates, cruise ships, and order things for their friend's house and buy their friend computers, and it all seems wonderful. Or they're out partying and they get raped, they get dumped in an alley. So that's one danger, is that everything seems great, but it's very impulsive. They don't have the sort of grown-ups, the chorus of grown-ups in their head that we see in this scene in Faust, saying, come on, slow down. Wouldn't you rather just sit down and have a good meal and take it easy? The other is what's called a mixed episode, which is when someone is severely depressed and becomes manic at the same time. And that is what will give someone the energy, someone with severe depression who's bipolar, that is what will give them the energy to come out of the depression long enough to commit suicide. And so that's why manic episodes are usually regarded so much more as emergencies than it might seem when someone's saying, oh, this is wonderful. The medical world regards these as true emergencies that should be treated immediately because there's so many dangers involved. Then I just wanted to step back a little further in time to what Doug was saying about, I think it was Creon, and I forget the other one. And it made me think of the schools of thought and philosophy. One is consequentialism, which is it's the results of your action that count. And the other is basically truth telling, which is it's more important to tell the truth no matter what you think the consequences will be. And I forget where that had arisen in Doug's thinking coming out of this. But I wonder if Goethe is also trying to present those ideas in some way.
Go ahead, Doug.
Well, to clarify the Oedipus, the goal of Oedipus is to cure the plague. And the plague is caused by the murder of the previous king. And the blood cries out from the ground for justice. Whether he should be killed or shouldn't be killed is not the issue. Blood spilled is a sin and must be cleansed. You know, you must go through a cleansing after war. You must go through a cleansing after different things. And so this blood of the king has been spilled. It turns out that Oedipus pursues that, and in pursuing that and finding the truth, he cures the plague. That's easily forgotten by oh, he killed his father, he married his mother. And so Freud made that the Oedipal complex, but Hamlet's much more an Oedipal figure than Oedipus. Oedipus knows nothing about that. He's completely unconscious of that. It's not like he doesn't have an unconscious desire for his mother. He's actually runs away from who he thinks are his parents to avoid doing that. That's his conscious choice, is to avoid that. He ends up, because his parents are freaked out by an omen, they have an irrational reaction to an omen, so they take this boy and have a shepherd kill him on the mountains. Well, the shepherd lets him live and he survives and he comes back as their nemesis because of their fear of these omens. And so Oedipus pursues the truth. Even his mother figures it out before he does and warns him, don't pursue this, don't do this, and he pursues it. And he sacrifices everything to find the truth and cure the plague. That is why he is a hero. And he gives his bones to Athens, not to Thebes, because the bones of a hero will enrich the land. And so it's a very ancient sort of thing so the truth, he pursues the truth. Creon, on the other hand, when it comes to Antigone and her need to fulfill religious rituals and bury both of her brothers, even though one was an enemy of Thebes and one was an ally of Thebes, he pursues her, she dies, and his kingdom, he also loses his kingdom, but he loses his son, he loses his family, he loses everything as well, but he doesn't achieve anything by pursuing the truth. So that's the Oedipal, you have to look at the Oedipal trilogy to make sense of it.
Doug,
We think of Oedipus.
Just to clarify for people that will be watching this, how does this relate to Faust?
Well, they're both trying on a pursuit of truth and how the world works and whether you can be saved and whether you can't be saved, and the suffering
So
people.
It's not from the perspective of what's the ultimate value, truth, or the consequences of your whatever truth seeking.
Yes, and truth is truth destroys some things and creates other things, but it's the truth, I think, is something that Goethe is trying to pursue. Even Hamlet is saying, "Oh, cursed spite."
We're almost out of time, but I want to just mention one thing. Maybe we can revisit this later. One of the distinctions that I noticed between Marlowe's Faust and Goethe's Faust is Marlowe's Faust is much more interested in the truth of how things work. Faust, on the other hand, is fed up with how things work. He doesn't care. He doesn't ask Mephisto, hey, by the way, what's really happening with this hell stuff? Who is in charge there? How is it organized? Who is the boss? What's your structure? What's the bureaucracy like in hell or whatever? He doesn't ask you any of that. He doesn't care. All he cares about is this world and everything he can experience here. Whereas Marlowe, Faust is much more interested in kind of the heavenly and the devilish things. So he's much more medieval Faust is, which of course he was, right? Faust lived in, I guess it was still after the medieval times, but he is still a person from the old world, if you will. Whereas Goethe's world, they're not interested in figuring out how many angels can fit in on a needle point, right? They've abandoned all of that. They don't care. They just care about what's the end result, the consequences, right? That's what Madeline was saying. The philosophy is much more utilitarian. And of course, 1800s were all about Malthus and utilitarianism to almost to the exclusion of anything else, to the exclusion of beauty, to the exclusion of these abstract ideals, which is, by the way, to tie it with Dostoevsky, this is where the rebellion of Dostoevsky comes in. And he says, no, you can't just give a person enough to eat. We're more than animals. That's his thesis, is you need more than just an efficient way to dole out food and necessities. Human beings need abstract things like beauty and truth and etc. Love. Beauty will save the world, according to Dostoevsky, not rationing of food. And poets or Pushkin is better than boots is his way of putting it, right? So anyway, to tie it back to Faust, we're saying that Faust is much more of a consequence-oriented person, sounds like, and the conflict with people from the old world is that they are more interested in the truth, seeking for truth's sake, and not necessarily interested in the consequences. So Oedipus, we're saying, is the kind of is a person from the disappearing world, the world that is doomed to perish, precisely because they don't care about the consequences. Would you characterize it like that, Doug, or not?
Well, something you said sort of spun off into another thought I had about half an hour ago about a lot of this inconclusiveness of this story. I think if you go back to the prologue, where all these ghosts appear to him, and so of friends and poets who are long dead, who he wish could read his work now, but they've been dead. But I think the play, that is sort of the structure of the play. There are ghosts from the past who appear and disappear, and they manifest, and it's a very dreamlike play, which I think
it is.
Yeah, and I don't know what else to add to that. I'll leave it at that. But I think that when you go back to that first weird prologue about these things that just appear, which I like the way the director does the German version of it, where he's sitting in a theater. Theaters are full of ghosts of past performances. Every actor kind of knows that. And so he's there saying, all the actors, I went to see a show last night, and the climax of the show, they had little 3x5 cards, and they were talking about the dozens of theaters that have disappeared in Los Angeles over the last 50 years, really. And
commercially viable.
Too many to count, almost. I mean, it was like, which reminds me of Goethe, that he starts in a theater with a director and an actor and a clown debating about what will work,
Right.
And what's going to lead to the clowns have more truth than poets. And I think if we all reach back, a lot of us have the impression the clown knows more than the poet or the director does. I
think the director is a pretty what's the word, a balanced, wise person who says we need both. We need
to make money, we need both, is sort of what he says,
Exactly.
And that may be more enlightened, maybe not, it depends. But it's so these visions that appear, Shakespeare picks up on that, and I think Goethe's and the German writers by this point were very influenced by Shakespeare. We are such stuff as dreams are made of, and theaters. And in Europe at that time, theater was an outlet for great philosophers. Schiller wrote plays, Goethe wrote plays, Lessing wrote plays. Some of the greatest European philosophers wrote plays that were entertaining and that the public went to. That's not the tradition in America. American theater tends to be commercial throughout its whole 300-year history. it's a commercial theater. And sometimes it does great work, but it's not considered an outlet for the world's top philosophers, which historically theater was that.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Doug. Thank you. That's a great, I guess that's a great finishing line for the meetup today. So many things, right, that we discussed today. I want to thank everybody for participating. Thank you for sticking with the schedule. And for next time, we'll meet in 2 weeks, just like we've been meeting until now. And we'll be covering part 2, act 4. So part 2, act 4 for next time. Really look forward to the conversation. Thanks again, everybody, for participating. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, everyone.